Back when I did my video about the Kreg Precision Miter Gauge, a subscriber left me a comment about this product that he used called a miter set, and I took a look at it online, and it turned out to be love at first sight, so I wound up ordering one. Here it is. It came in a nice plastic package. It's basically a precision miter setting gauge that uses some pins, and it came with some instructions there of how to set it up, but it's really a basic, simple to use unit, and it's a really beautiful job they did at machining it. It's a machined aluminum plate, very precision. It's supposed to all be machined within 1/1000. It's got a nice rubber pad on the back, and then it comes with a couple of really nice tapered pins. They really did a good job on the engineering of this, using the taper pins to get a nice precise location. So that's basically what it looks like, and it allows you to just set the number of segments you're going to be using on a project, and it sets the correct angle on your miter gauge. Now, at the same time, the replacement parts from Kreg arrived at the same time. So basically, they sent out another bare miter gauge there to replace the other one that it was having problems with. And this one, actually, if you look, the pin is a perfect fit. All the lines line up when the pin's in place, and there's no rocking whatsoever. So I figured I'd just kind of throw the two of these together in one video to let you see how the miter set works and how the new gauge works. So basically, there you can see the old gauge. The thing had a lot of rock in it, and it was hard to get lined up exactly to zero. And the that replacement one has basically zero rock in it. Now to do this setup, I'm just going to pull this aluminum fence off the old one for now, just to show you how this miter set actually works. So I took the old one here and I threw it in the miter set, and I set it for the 90-degree setting. Got it in place, got it locked down, and then if you go to put that pin back in, you can notice that if you look down through the holes, there's no alignment between the two holes. So that's where all the error was coming from, it looks like, on the gauge when I was having problems getting it set at zero. You can see that pin just won't fit down in there. Even though it's an undersized pin and there's a lot of shake, it still won't fit. So then I decided to just try another setting, and so this is for the 22.5 degree angle there that I've got it set. And with a narrow miter gauge, you need a nice precision block of wood to work with. So there I pushed it up against the pins, and I locked it down, and same thing. You look down in the hole, you can see that they were not aligned and the pin would not go in place. So there definitely was something machined wrong on this gauge, and that was why I was having the problems. And I'm glad they did send out another one, because I'm real happy with the results on the new one. So there you can see, if you put the pin in place and lock it, then the angle is off. So there's no way to get that original gauge set up. So here's the new gauge. Just to show you, I'm going to throw it in this miter set. And this is just an amazing little, simple setup block that I would recommend buying before investing in a good miter gauge. But there it is. I set that at zero, locked it down. You can see the pin slips right in. Perfect alignment. Gauge is set. Zeroes itself out, and there's no slop in it. So the replacement one definitely did solve all the problems with it. So I would like to thank Kreg for sending that out. And we'll go back at the 22.5 degree setting, and I went back and I checked all the settings, and same thing, the pin would slide right in at any of the angles. So this gauge seems to be precision machined, and a lot more precise than the original one. Kind of makes me wonder, this new gauge is good, but it kind of makes me wonder if they tried putting an undersized pin in this original one with all the shake to make up for the error in the way it was machined. But anyhow, the new one works good. So basically, this block is just amazing. It allows you to set the number of segments you want on a glue up to anywhere from 4 to 20. And for some reason it's missing the 19, but I don't think you'd really need 19 segments anyway. So I went and once I got the miter gauge checked out, I went back and put that extrusion on the new miter gauge here, and it looks like I'm good to go. Now I did have that miter gauge set at the 6 segment mark on that gauge before I put this back together, so here it is. It's really easy to just swap that out, and then I decided I was going to go back and just do some cuts just to really verify the accuracy on this. So basically what I'm doing is I'm going to cut off 6 blanks. Started out with a little narrow piece, and it turned out that I did find a problem with that using a narrower board and this miter gauge, which we'll get to later. But basically it's just I put a stop block there, and then I just make a cut, flip it, make a cut, flip it until I got the 6 segments that I was gonna check out and see how it worked. And one thing I can say, having that extension on the front of the saw table there really did make a difference when it came to cutting with the angle cuts on this gauge. So, basically here I'm just gonna try to fit these together, and according to the specs on the miter set gauge, it should be a perfect fit. Funny thing is, though, I'm starting to notice that there's a little bit of like a skew on the cuts that I made on these angle pieces, and they kind of don't fit together unless you start flipping them around and stuff. So I knew that there was something going on there. So anyhow, I just took some tape to temporarily hold them in place so I could put a clamp on them. Just took a couple pieces of masking tape, put on the corners there to try to hold them good and tight. And it's just figured I'd tape them together and then throw a rubber band on just to see how they fit together. But I was seeing some joints that weren't quite perfect the way I thought that they should be. I put that together with a rubber band, and then I went back and actually threw a clamp on there to see if I could pull it in nice and tight. So I had one of these old, I guess they call it a web clamp. These are from years ago, and just wrap the web around, and then you just tighten a ratchet there with a screwdriver, and it pulls everything up. And even with this clamp, I noticed that I could not get I did not get perfect fitting joints on all these corners when you looked at it real close. So then I started going back and checking the saw blade to make sure that was parallel and perpendicular to the table, and everything was set perfect on that. And I started going through everything, and then I pulled out that new miter gauge, and I looked at it. There you can see there's like some really fine misalignment on there, but that new miter gauge, I pulled it out and looked at it, and I put a square on it to the table, and you can see that when the knob is loose, it's square. When you tighten that knob down, it actually twists the miter gauge down so it's at a square. And with a narrow block like that on end, you actually get a skewed when you cut an angle. Turns out looks like there's about a 20,000 spacer in a pivot point there of the gauge, and on the back where it clamps down there's nothing, and you can see how that actually tapers when you clamp it down. So it does, you don't notice it on a straight cut, but when you have something held up against that fence on an angle cut, it does actually skew it, and it seems to be a problem with the gauge. So then I went back and I figured, okay, I'll try a 5-sided thing, and I'll set it up again with the with that block, and I set that up perfect. And then I decided to go with a wider piece of walnut that I could actually hold down against the table to keep it flat and keep a good square cut instead of pulling it up against the gauge and having it twist. So there it is. You can see I've got a wider piece of walnut, and actually when I'm cutting it now, I'm pushing it down on the table so it's not following the gauge angle. And I did the same thing. I went back and I did 5 cuts now again this time, just to compare and see how it worked out. And there you can see how that little shelf I put really does help when you're mitering. I never thought about that, but even mitering narrow stuff, it makes a big difference. So I feel it's a worthwhile thing to add to the saw. So anyhow, I got those 5 pieces cut, and same thing, I'm going to go through and just put some tape on them to hold them so I can get that other clamp around it. And I noticed that these cuts basically look like they were a lot better. They're fitting together nice and tight, and they're actually perfect. So I got the 5 of them taped together, and then I put the clamp back on there, cranked it down, and there you can see these are perfect joints on every one of them. So it is, that miter set gauge is dead on. It's a Kreg jig that you have to, or the Kreg precision miter gauge, you have to be careful of when you use it. So, and I have to tell you that I did pick this up at Hartville Tool, again another tool I purchased from them, and they actually had a 10% off discount going on now. It's until June 20th or something like that. So I did save 10% off on this miter gauge with free, or the set gauge with free shipping. So I'd highly recommend to order from them and just watch for a sale. In the meantime, I took that guard that I was storing on the side of my table off, and it looked like this would fit in there perfect. So I'm going to leave that right there on the side of the saw and put that top guard somewhere else. So this is something that I really I would really highly recommend this for your miter gauge before you go out and spend a lot of money on a gauge, just to so you can do a comparison. Yeah, it's just amazing how much I learned from having a bunch of great subscribers, and all the feedback and the comments that they give. I would have never known that this had existed, and probably never found it on my own. So I'd like to thank everybody for all their the feedback and comments like this. And I also just wanted to warn everybody about how that gauge actually does skew a little bit, especially when you're doing angle cuts. So be careful with that if you're trying to cut something held up against the fence there and cut on an angle, because it could give you problems like it gave me. I'm basically going to take the old gauge apart and try to take that spacer out and see if I can add a second spacer under the threaded lock there. That hopefully will solve the issue for me. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.